Hey there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the planet today, because I know we go internationally, so we have people joining us from all around the planet. Great to see you. My name's Mike Grehan, and I am the moderator, and I'm really pleased and proud to be a part of this mini-series, as it is, where I get an opportunity to just call up old friends of mine and sit and chat about the past for it's a great excuse when you haven't had a chance to. No, seriously, I've been in the industry for so long. In fact, next year, believe it or not, I'll be celebrating 30 years. 30 years since I started a digital marketing agency. How we're still calling it digital marketing 30 years later, I don't know. Maybe that'll turn up in our conversation. But over the years, I've had some fantastic opportunities, some great times. But I've worked with some of the leading executives in the industry, some of whom I was there with at the very beginning, some of whom I've joined a little later on. But the story behind them all is that they all had to start somewhere. And even though now, with the great successes they've had, they're still taking on agencies, growing them and turning them to international brands. Those that are running smaller businesses, getting right to, as people refer to, the tipping point. Maybe you're a smaller agency, you get to around about 50 people. That really is a major point in the growth of your agency. So what do? Where do you go? Well, the best thing to do is ask the people who have done that. So I've been able to get in touch with some friends I know that I have great admiration for, who've been able to do this. So my guest today on this show, he and I go back, and I was trying to figure this out. Anyway, Mike Gullaksen has been in the industry for a very long time. He's currently CEO with NP Digital, which is one of the fastest growing international agencies. We're going to talk a lot more about that. But Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us.
Thanks for having me. I want to say probably 2001 or two at one of the SES events. That's got to be one of the first times we met each other.
Got to be at a conference, and no doubt it was sitting at the bar as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure of
So
it.
you've had an amazing career, Mike. You go way back to the beginning of the industry. One of the interesting things that I think we can touch on today, which we hadn't discussed before, is that when you came online way back in the day, like me, and I say, 30 years ago, there was no such thing as digital marketing, online internet marketing. It was brand new. So as marketers, we all had to go through this steep learning curve because we're trying to take all of the stuff that we learned in what we called conventional marketing and trying to force it into digital marketing. And you actually end up unlearning some of the stuff that you'd learned before. Now that the industry has gone through a major transformation with AI and machine learning, I think we're kind of at the same kind of inflection point, where we have to start and think about we're doing things entirely differently to the way that we did before and what we call digital marketing. But let's just go back to the very beginning. I know I said in a promo that we did for the show that you ended up in the industry because your sister's boyfriend was doing something called search engine optimization. I realize now that you don't actually have a sister. That was my mistake. It was your friend's sister. But just give us a quick overview of your introduction to the industry through your sister's friend's boyfriend.
My friend's sister's boyfriend. Yeah. One of my best friends growing up, his sister was dating somebody that we were calling the internet guy, because that was the moniker you would get back then when you had a business that was only focused on online. And asked me what I was going to do after I graduated college. I was, this is me at 21 years old, and I said, well, I've got some internships lined up or a couple job offers, but I'm not sure yet. And he asked me about what my interests were, and said, would you be willing to join my organization? And he explained what they did, and I was very intrigued by it. Right, helping companies connect with people online was the gist of it. And started in 2000, 21-year-old right out of college, doing inside sales for a company that ultimately was called iCrossing. And been at this for the last 24 years now, and had some success along the way. But it was a unique experience at that first one, for sure.
So was the company originally called iCrossing? or did it
No, no,
change?
no,
No,
no.
no. I had a feeling because the same as iProspect. I was with iProspect in the very early days. iCrossing, iProspect were two of the bigger brands, but they both changed their ID. So what
Yeah.
was it? So what was the rationale behind iCrossing?
Well, not a lot of people know the story, but yeah, the founder was a visionary for sure, and he started the business with a company called ShopAtAll. It was a search engine. He really enjoyed and loved what he was seeing through Yahoo as a portal and search engine, if you will, and some of the other players out there, and tried to launch that and did. But that business then shifted into what was the craze at the time, which were shopping malls. So he changed the name to ShopAtAll. And it was a shopping portal where through SEO and digital marketing means, I use that moniker for you on purpose, drove people to the mall and to brands then that paid to be listed in the mall. The brands loved it, and they were getting their guaranteed CPCs, CPMs at the time. And they said, well, you're making your web portal, your mall show up so well on the search engines. Can you help us with that? And that, clicked in his head, and he said, there's another opportunity here that's probably quite a bit bigger. And he changed the name then to Traffic Results. That's when I joined the organization. It was known as Traffic Results. And good name, bad name, that's up for subjective debate. But we realized really quickly, like, hey, this is a bigger thing than just driving traffic. It's about doing business online. So we changed the name then to Internet Crossing, doing business on the internet with people. And then we realized when we were getting a lot of inbound interest from other countries that this isn't just about the US, this is a global thing. So we augmented the name then to International Crossing, because we were doing business with anybody, anywhere, at any time. It was a bit of a long name, and our number one competitor and really the leader in the space, iProspect, that you mentioned, we just said, hey, it might make sense to shorten this thing down to iCrossing. And ultimately that's what we did, and that's what we landed on. And then they've kept that name now for 20 something years, almost 30 years probably.
So at which point did you begin to realize, or did the founder begin to realize that, that this was going to be something much bigger than starting a small agency and kind of a side gig of something, something on the side, as it were, when did you, reach the point in terms of the number of staff or the client demands that you were really going to have to take this? Wow, this is going to be serious business. We're going to go for growth,
Yeah, no, I think, look, Jeff Herzog, the founder, always had that vision of it being much bigger than what it was, where it was when I joined. When I joined, there was a handful of employees, and we were under $1 million in revenue. And ultimately, we took that business quite a bit further than that. We can get to that in a minute if we want. But he always had greater aspirations. He was always thinking of the offering as being much bigger than people gave it credit for, meaning like the value behind, at the time, search engine optimization, and then search engine marketing, which had launched, 99, 2000, right around there with pay-per-click stuff. But he always had aspirations that it would be a very big company. And I think in 2001 or two, we had landed our first $1 million account. And that was at the time a company called DealTime, turned into shopping.com. And you probably know the stories there. And we started to then just get interest for big brands, global big brands. And we recognized that we needed to really professionalize the business and really focus on people, process, and technology to get us there. And that from 2000, I would say that was around 2001. From there, it was, gangbusters, both from an organic growth perspective, but also from an M&A perspective, making sure that we were setting up the business, future-proofing it for success, and solving for the needs and wants of the customers. We listened to the customers. They would ask us to do things. If we didn't do them, and we heard this consistently from more customers, we would either build or buy our way into those offerings for our clients so that we could serve their needs and wants. And that really did start happening 2001, I would say. There's Jeff right there.
You just joined us. So something I don't think I've ever asked before, or Jeff, did Jeff, before he started this business, did he have a background in kind of agency, advertising, or PR?
Nope. He worked on Wall Street, which is where I think he got his drive. He's one of the hardest working people that I've worked with, a good mentor in that regard. So no marketing background whatsoever.
So the interesting thing is that, as I was saying before, I think in Malcolm Gladwell's book, which A Tipping Point, which is, if you haven't read the book, it's been around for a long time, but it's still worth a read. But he does say that by the time an agency or a business gets to about 50 employees, that is the tipping point. Now you really have to start thinking about how you're going to grow this business. So, when you got to that point, and I've seen it a couple of times before, this is when you have to start saying things like, mom's been a great help as a general manager in the office, but maybe we need a professional, and, those kind of things. You've got to start and think about HR. So when that journey begins, when you get to around about that tipping point, what are the primary things that you start to think about then?
Yeah, no, I think that, look, there's always a point in time where you need to level up the business, right, and professionalize it. And you've got to turn it into, from a hobby or a place that you're having fun into a real organization. I don't know if 50 is the right number. I think it just depends on the industry you're in, and there's nuances by country and what have you. I always found that at about 100 employees, or that 15 to $20 million range, is where things really start to change and it gets pretty difficult. We at iCrossing, I think it was maybe 2004 or 5. Jeff came to the realization, and I think there was some encouragement by the outside investors that we needed to bring in some more experienced folks that had backgrounds in the large-scaled agency environment and world, and we did that around that time, which was really the catalyst then for a lot of the M&A that we did to scale the business in conjunction to the organic growth that we were experiencing. But I've always found, for whatever reason, and I say this, I don't truly mean it, but it's fairly easy to get an agency to $20 million. And then getting it to 30 is a little bit more difficult. And then getting it from 30 to 50 is really hard. And then that next one is 100 million. So at each one of those, I would say, inflection points, there's different things that need to be taken into consideration. In the beginning, it's really about people and process, right? And maybe some technology of what you need to leverage to scale the business and be efficient, and not lose sight of the fact that as you're growing so quickly, you need to be mindful of efficiency, especially making sure that you're taking into consideration things like billability and utilization rates, right? Not a lot of people, when they found a company in the marketing services space, think about it down to the hours that are spent against clients and what those targets should be around how many hours each employee has to spend against the customer. But that stuff is very important, because real quickly you can hire ahead as you get excited and you see these contracts coming in, and you end up hiring too quickly, and eventually you get yourself in a cash position that ultimately is not good, and then you have to go into cost control mode, which not a lot of new agency leaders have experience with, and it's a very difficult thing to wrap your head around, cost control, that is. But in the beginning, I would say it's people and process, and then ultimately technology. So back end stuff, you got to upgrade your financial systems, your HR systems, your time tracking systems, those types of things. And then, I think at least back then and in our space, once you got to about that 30 million mark, it was difficult without M&A to really, I would say, get to that next level. And so at that point, we really took on some significant funding from outside VC and PE. And, then we decided to take a look at our offering and take a look at the biggest challenges we had within the business and solve for those through buying really great organizations that complemented what we did, and where we had, let's say, some holes. So we were filling the holes, or infilling, where we needed more scale. We did some paid search, but we weren't known for paid search, so we needed to go buy a paid search agency. We bought a company called Newgate Internet, and that helped us scale and get credibility and helped you move faster and grow quicker. And then we looked at a whole bunch of other areas. I think the one solve we were trying to really tackle was the biggest bane of, let's call them at the time, SEO agencies had, which was implementation challenges by the customers. It's still the biggest problem in that,
a lot has changed there.
Yeah, nothing's really changed. But the vision was, and it was a brilliant vision, was let's go buy a web development company, and one that's scaled and one that works with enterprise brands, because we aspire to only work with enterprise brands. And let's build these websites with SEO from the ground up. If we control the development, then we control the implementation. That should lead us to the promised land. Easier said than done, right? I think it was a little bit ahead of its time with the idea, and clients still didn't see or understand the value in SEO at the time. This is the mid 2000s. So we were just, essentially bolting on a web development agency and building websites and forcing or trying to force the SEO component onto it. But it wasn't as well received immediately right out of the gate. Eventually it got there. But yeah, so there's some things that we did at that agency and some of the critical inflection points. But I will say, depending upon how your company is structured, the ownership structure, the funding you've taken, all of these things can be augmented by outside pressures and appeasing, the people that have invested in your business. That's a whole nother story, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I can go back, like I say, 30 years near enough now. And I remember working for this huge international corporation and they're just trying to get their head around this whole internet thing. And they want me to, I mean, it wasn't even SEO. It didn't have a name back then, but they just wanted to be found on whatever these things are called, search engines. This is a huge organization. And I vividly remember sending them an email saying, can you send me the username and password for your FTP access? So and like 15 minutes later, I get a username and password, and now I've got FTP access to this huge organization's website. But to them back then, they didn't even know what FTP was anyway, kind of thing, and they weren't taking that seriously. So yeah, you could get that kind of implementation. And I think, the idea that you had about working with the web developers back in the day, yeah, that's great if we can build your websites. But now speaking to a client, it's less than likely you're going to get anywhere near the website. You can give the advice, you could send some content, you could do that kind of thing.
I think
Yeah,
that definitely depends though on the size of the client, right? Like the current business that I'm running has a lot of small business clients, and they will allow us to implement because they don't have the internal teams to do the work. So I think that depends on the scale and the size of the business. But enterprise, yeah, 100% agree with you. Nor do we really want to be fooling around too much with their websites, right? So it's always in a dev environment whenever we're doing things there.
I hate to say it, no names mentioned, but just while we're doing a little bit of reminiscing as we do, I worked for a huge client for a long time, and I left the agency that I was with and did another thing. And then some years later, I came back to the agency, and some of the recommendations that I'd made 3 years before still hadn't been implemented by the client. So yeah. So I mean, the client relationship is important. Anyway, let's just take a step back for a minute again to what you said before. I was saying, the tipping point could be 50 employees. You say it's $50 million. It could be, to get there. But
depending upon your aspirations in the end game, right? There's completely different goals that you might set for the business.
I guess so. Yeah. But I think that you do reach a point where, you do have to bring in professional people. There's at least so much that you can do yourself. But is that the point? And I've had this conversation so many times before, that when you are taking growth seriously, like you said, that you have to start looking for people to help with funding. And then you also have to bring in that more specialist kind of talent. And then you also have to be brave enough, even as the founder of your company, to say, well, I can't do anything, everything kind of thing. So I do need to bring in other people. So, in terms of steps, what do you think about there? How do I get enough money to pay the salaries for these people? Do I, if I'm making enough money now, do I just buy more salespeople and get more sales? Is that the way to do it? There are a couple of different approaches, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I'm not disagreeing with your headcount, marker as something to use. I think somebody had told me once that it was 100, right? And this person was a serial entrepreneur, and he said, once I get to 100 employees, I know it's time to bring in a CEO to run my business, because I'm just not good at this, that, and the other thing, nor do they want to involve themselves. So being an operator of a business is far different than being a founder and the visionary of a business. And I think that the founders that recognize that are the ones that typically have a lot of success in scaling the business and taking it to whatever the goal is, whether that be just turning it into a very large business or a transaction. That's not to say that there's not a lot of founder CEOs that are driving and running the biggest companies in the world, because some of them are in our space, obviously, with Facebook still being one of them. So yeah, no, I think it just depends, right? It depends on the needs of the business. If you need to level up the business from a operations perspective, go find somebody that's really good at operations, that digs into things like process development, workflow development, understands organizational structures and the support mechanisms that need to go underneath it, from not just a human capital perspective and a process development perspective, but potentially technology that helps the business scale, whether that be in sales. And I remember when we went from Act, which was our CRM solution at iCrossing back in the day, which was not an online version, so spent a lot of, every weekend in the office setting up the pipeline for the next week, to then Salesforce, which allowed us to work from home and do those types of things. So understanding when those new technologies come out that drive efficiency or drive opportunity in whatever area of the business, to embrace that and to put it into the operational excellence and how you take it to market. If it's a marketing thing, know that, and this is interesting in our space, right? Not a lot of agencies market themselves very well. But at iCrossing, I recall and remember that it was a main focus of the founder. He loved marketing the business, but he also understood that it wasn't just about marketing. It was about the PR component to marketing and the analyst relationships to marketing. And so as such, we hired professional people to come in and manage those parts of the business. And then you start to build those relationships with the analysts like Forrester, or you start to get a little bit more exposure in some of the publications. You ran a few of them back in the day, right? But in today's world, the Ad Ages, the Ad Weeks, the Media Posts, the Search Engine Lands, et cetera. Congratulations to the Search Engine Land folks on their acquisition. But you bring those people in, and it's knowing the right time. And I think some founders know when it's the right time and some don't. And the ones that embrace it, tend to have a pretty good outcome.
So yeah, I'm not going to go off at a tangent. Maybe towards the end we can talk about that acquisition, but is it a good idea for a vendor to own the publication? Just something else that you mentioned there. I don't know if you saw, Brian just popped up there and said, Act, whatever happened to that? Talking about the names of companies, it's just trivia, but it is interesting to know where they came from. I had no idea in all these years that even you and I have known each other for a long time. I never once said to you, where did iCrossing get its name from, But now that you've mentioned Act, well, of course, iProspect, who again, iProspect, iCrossing, rivals and
Sure.
very fast-growing companies at the same time. Well, that started out as, direct something, or a sales direct something, whatever it was. It was an entirely different name. And it became iProspect. And I asked Frederick Marchini, who is the founder, one day, where did you get the idea for iProspect? And he said, I was opening Act one day, looking at this, and it said electronic prospecting. And I went, oh, that's a great idea. Internet prospecting, iProspect, and that's where the name came from.
Yep, a good one.
So exactly, just came around. When we reach the point that we begin to understand, that we're going for growth, that we're making enough revenue, it's kind of a bit of a balancing act. But certainly one thing that you were aware of, obviously with Jeff, I was very much aware of when I was working around the same time with Frederick Marchini. Both of these guys were visionaries, but they both understood the power of brand and positioning themselves. So they did spend a lot of time of bringing people in and getting themselves in front of the right kind of people. So their own marketing and PR became very important to them. I guess, when you reach a certain point, you have a better idea on how to build, the budget for marketing. But generally speaking, when you're a smaller business, it's just like, I've paid all the bills and what's left I'll use for marketing kind of thing. How important is the actual presence, the visibility of the brand? I only say that again because there are a couple of agencies that I know that if I mentioned the name of them, you wouldn't even heard of them, and yet they're multi-million-dollar businesses. However, they're just working on referrals only, and they're working with huge clients like Amex and that kind of thing. So
Yep. No, I think, look, iCrossing turned itself into a big brand and people knew of it globally, but um, the the real gem in my, I think, career, and the real I would say amazement I have is with the company called Covario. That
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
that company when I joined it. It was a software company that was starting to beat the likes of iCrossing and iProspect by helping companies take search in house, and it was called SEM Director.
Originally, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know it's a very nice
Ultimately,
Russian guy who started the business.
yeah, Dima Zlotin,
Yeah.
tremendous founder, great human being. Um, we made the decision to change the name because we felt SEM Director was too narrow, to Cavario, and we did that at the time where the software was telling all of the users of it. It was the first, one of the first SEO and SEM softwares out there. It was telling them how to fix, either their campaigns on paid search or their SEO initiatives, based upon all kinds of different things. But what happened was they kept saying, we don't have the time to implement. Imagine that, back to the implementation challenge. And so a couple friends of mine had joined that organization. I had been taking note that they were beating us by helping clients insource, but they had said, like, hey, we need professional services. We need to launch an agency. And so, they reached out to me, and I joined the organization, and that was my remit. It was build an agency, because it was a software company initially. And what we did was change the name to Covario, which I think just flashed on the screen there.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
By the way,
short
should
for
I just quickly
covariance.
jump in
Big
and
story
say
there.
that
Go ahead.
I was having a drink with Dima one day, yes, because I've known him for a long time as well. And that question came around as well, because I knew them as SEM director or SEM director, whichever way you wanted to call it, like SEM Russia,
Sure.
back in the day there. And I said, why Cavario? And he just looked at me. He said, it's based on covariance, Mike.
I'm surprised you knew that. That's great.
Exactly. Well, not a lot of people do, but I went, dough. Well, that seemed pretty obvious.
Yeah, statistical term. Don't tell me what it means, because I would need the gentleman who used to explain it to join us to explain it.
Yeah, but even when he did change it to Cavario, the name change worked, but for a little while. But I don't think it was. Um, so you were there when they changed the name, yes?
Yeah, I joined right when it was changing, 2009, or right around there. And so the idea was, we're a small company. I think when I joined, it was maybe 10 million in revenue or a little bit under that. And it was primarily software. There was no services for the most part. And we decided, hey, we need to brand this new name, and we need to invest in this new name, and we want people to know it and know about it. And, we were heavily into webinars at that time, thought leadership, giving stuff away for free to build the brand, which, is a great playbook. And it works for us today at the agency I'm at today. But what I thought was very interesting, I'll fast forward 4 years, 5 years roughly. We had been just, at the end of every year, we would say, okay, if we had an extra $1 million, where would we market the business? What would we do? And we just went on a spree for maybe a year or 18 months, pushing our brand through thought leadership, through events, speaking, you name it, you getting us, slots. Thank you for that. But also, we were buying a ton of display advertising on the publications that, all of our clients were viewing and our peers were viewing. And I remember we were competing at Covario with iProspect quite a bit and iCrossing quite a bit, and our story was resonating. We were winning a decent amount of business, and we grew that services business from 0 to $40 million in about a 4-year time period. And I remember talking to Jeremy Kornfeld. He was at the time the president of iProspect, and they reached out to us about an acquisition, and he said, we're just tired of seeing you guys everywhere and everybody talking about Cavario and you beating us on opportunities and accounts. And it really was about a brand that we were punching way ahead of our weight, or way above our weight class. Everybody knew of the brand, but nobody knew we were only really about a $40 million company at the time. I mean, we were acting like we were a $100 million plus global organization. And we had satellite offices around the world, but they were very small, but we were winning huge remits and really leveraging the process, leveraging the technology, but also, building that brand so that the perception became the reality, which ultimately led to iProspect saying, all right, enough. We want the business. We want the management team. Let's make this happen. And that's ultimately what did happen. Dentsu bought us.
It's also a great way to take a competitor out of the.
That's true.
That's
I think at the time,
time.
I think Rob had just left iProspect, so Jeremy was in need of a management team. He had a good one in place, but he needed more on scale because it was a pretty scaled business, and there was a defection of some leadership at iPro, and a pretty big defection that followed that leadership defection of clients. So by bolting the two businesses together, you created a little bit of a powerhouse. And oddly enough, iProspect wasn't known for SEO when they acquired us. That was another main thing, because Kario was mostly SEO and content, probably about 70%. iPro was known as a paid search agency, believe it or not, even though it started as an SEO shop. So that was another reason. Yeah.
It was the first SEO, even didn't have a name then as SEO, but it was the first organic. So, well, there was no paid search when they started anyway,
Yep.
Yeah, so here's an interesting thing. So, you say that, originally SEM director, SEM director, that was all about a technology. And around about that time, everybody was trying to come up with something for paid search and, ranking software and that kind of stuff. Over a period of time, I think I began to recognize that every major brand growing in the agency area, everybody had their own black box technology. Yes, we're an agency, but we've developed technology, which is, and I love the term proprietary, because you can take that whichever way you want sometimes.
Sure.
But everybody had a pitch. And a number of clients have said this to me before. We talk to every agency, they all say the same thing. But the one thing that they all get to towards the end is we've developed our own technology and our black box is better than the other guy's black box. But what it does lead to is some kind of confusion in the marketplace as to, are you an agency selling services or are you a technology company? It's hard to get that balance right.
Yeah.
When iProspect came to Kario, which had been a technology company, they actually felt that they were buying a services agency, yes?
Yeah, they actually didn't buy the technology. That stayed with the private equity and VC folks and they brought Dima back actually to run it. We had split the business into two, and we had named the technology division Rio SEO. And I think that there is something to what you just said. If you combine everything and you go to market with one name, and you don't have a separate name for the technology or the software or whatever that component is, I do feel there's some confusion there. And we missed that on the iCrossing days. We had bought some technologies, a bid management system with Newgate Internet, a dashboarding technology, other stuff down the road of DSP stuff and a lot of other things. But we launched analytics and social monitoring softwares, and we didn't identify the need to separate those into their own little units, if you will, and take them to market and sell them externally. We were only using them for our clients. So there is that dilution or confusion. But where I think I learned my lesson there was when we split the brand at Kario and Rio SEO, because people truly understood what they were getting. Yeah, I'm signing up for Rio SEO, a self-service model in your software. I'll use the software, I'll do it. Oh, I'm signing up for the Kario. I get the software, but I also get your professional services teams or your solutions teams executing on my behalf as an extension of my marketing team to drive the business outcomes that I'm looking for. And we've done that here at the agency I'm at now. We've got the agency, which is NP Digital, and under the agency, we have the technology division that's labeled Ubersuggest, and we acquired another one called Answer the Public, and we built a bunch of internal tools. But I think by having those separate monikers or names for the solution, it helps the customer understand, what they're buying, and it helps the people outside of the agency, when they're evaluating you, understand that you believe enough in the technology that you name it something separate, you invest in it, and you maintain it and keep it going. I think the other core critical thing here, and the difference is at Kario and at NP Digital, our softwares are sold to the outside customers, right? They're not just for our internal customers or our internal teams. They're sold as a standalone and at scale. And I think that is a very big and unique differentiator to allowing you to be able to run a services and a software at the same time and together as one organization. I do think that was a learning that I had that is important for any agency trying to use software, build software, sell software.
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because we'll come to it in a second, where everybody and his dog now has an AI technology that they're trying to sell. I've never seen, it's just this explosion, and mainly it's, everybody has access to the same API, and that kind of thing. But I do think in terms of getting yourself positioned in the marketplace, you do have to be fairly clever about the way that you structure the company. So I want to go right back to the bare basics for a
Mm-hmm.
second. That if you start as an SEO shop, and SEO is still fairly much, although it's a different thing now to what it was back then, and it's going to change even more. But it is still a fairly specialized kind of thing. I mean, I ask people say use this term performance marketing, and SEO is in there, and I go, well, I don't know whether that fits under the performance marketing banner. So if you were starting again now, and it would be a very difficult time to be able to start again now, would you think about, well, I just want to be a specialist in this one field, and then I'm going to grow to become the biggest and the best known for this one specialist area? Or do you have to build the portfolio out and go, well, no, I'm going to get more clients if I do SEO and paid search? Oh, and then I'll do social media. Oh, now I'm going to do programmatic. So do you build out the portfolio of products, or do you just become
Good
the
question.
super? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, look, what should ultimately drive some of those decisions, and I'll walk you through what I think is the approach I take, or I would take. I think it depends on what the outcome is. If you're looking to, take on investment and you need to sell the company in a 4 to 5 year time period or horizon, because that's what the VC or private equity wants, that's going to take you down a certain road. If you just really want to be the best at what you do, and have a nice size business, but a lifestyle business, a family, type of an organization, an environment, that's going to have a different way to get there and achieve that. But I think, and look, I'm limited experience with 3 different agencies, but all have had successful outcomes. I would focus in on one service solution first. Do it really, really well. Get your base or your book of business to a point where the business is self-sufficient, it's cash flow positive, and you're profitable to the point where you can make investments and choose what that next place is that you spend your money or grow into. And one thing that I've learned along the way is listen to your customers. They're going to ask you and tell you what their needs are, what their pain points are, and you hear it enough times over and over again. That's when you should make the decision of, like, hey, they keep saying they need help in this area. We should help them in this area. And then, back then it was SEO to SEM, and then it was to social, and then it was to, keep going. I think, though, initially, and if you just want to have a family or a lifestyle business, one service is fine. But I promise you, it's way easier to scale a business when you have more things to sell, and you know your audience, and you pick an audience that's got scale behind it, and you target the right profile of a customer that can scale with you. And there's a few different ways to do that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, it just takes me back to the number of times that I've had this conversation as well about, when you present your agency to a client, there's a lot of things you'll say in a pitch just to get the business. And then when you do get the business, it's like, oh shit, now we really have to start do something here, kind of thing. And you end up with this situation where whatever it is that the client asks for, um, you want to keep them happy, and you end up with this thing called scope creep. You know exactly
Sure.
what that is. So how do you deal with that? Because you do have a case where a client takes you on for SEO, and then they'll go, actually, we need some content to go. Could you guys do some content? And you go, yeah, of course. Then the next thing you know, it's costing you to keep the client.
Yeah, no, and look, there's a few different things at play there, right? It's a very difficult conversation, or a difficult thing in a conversation, to tell the client, yes, but that's going to cost you money, and we need to charge you for that. That's a skill set that not every client services person has, because it's more of a sales type of a tactic there, right? But I do think it's critical, if you want to scale a business and get it to, let's call it $100 million plus type of organization, that you do, one, offer additional services when they're asked repeatedly, But back to your question on how do you control it? It starts with the contract. The T's and C's of your agreement, the scope that's in your actual contract. Make sure it's very explicit as to what you're going to do. Now, of course, you don't want to be overly rigid, but there's ways around that, right? If you're signing up a client for, let's call it any service for that matter, have a bucket of hours in there as consulting so that you can use those hours fluidly throughout the agreement while not impacting your, what you've estimated to be gross margin on the business. But then you start to get into things like gross margin. Do you understand what your gross margin needs to be in order to maintain profitability? And those are things that a lot of new agency owners or founders don't think about, right? But the finances behind things. Have a great CFO that can help you identify, at what point do we become unprofitable? Is that 40% gross margin, 35%, 55%? Depends on, your underlying cost base. Knowing that is important because what you do is then you factor that into when you price out the scope that you put into your contract, making sure you're charging enough to cover the human capital that you need to put behind the agreement or the scope, the technology that you have to pay for to support the scope, all of those things. And then, just be very clear and direct when they're asking for things that are out of scope. We can do that, of course, but you're going to need to pay for that. Reference back to your scope of work. You do insertion orders or augment or new contracts or things to that effect. And you track that back to, your gross margin targets, which are based upon then billability and utilization. I'll go back to that, right? We're in a services-based industry. It's all about the people doing the work. You need to know where the people's hours are going against each individual client. And from the contract up, you can track profitability at the client level. Once you get there, then you're golden, because profitability at the client level should ladder up to profitability targets at the organizational level. If they don't match, which clients to go look at and to identify, why is this one burning hot? Why are we unprofitable on this business? Did we make the decision to be because it's a marquee client helping us grow? Or we're just overstaffed or we're burning hot. We need to adjust that, sit down with the client, explain to them what's happening. And most of the time when you sit down with a client and you explain to them, hey, we've got scope creep problems, back to your question, they don't want you to fail as a business because then they're in trouble as looking for a new partner, right? So it's most of the time, not all the time. A lot of clients will not care, but most of the time they'll work with you on adjusting the scope and the payment structures.
So here's an interesting thing. We've used the word scale a lot, and everybody understands, if your business doesn't scale, well, you're finished from the very start. Forget about it, so you have to understand that. Certainly bringing in professional people, a CFO, when you're ready to grow, that kind of thing, certainly does help you to scale. But in terms of when you talk about growing a business, to most small business owners, to them it's just more sales, get more business, get more sales, get more business kind of thing. You have to be able to understand when it's right to say no. And then the pitfall, obvious, and I've seen this so many times with small businesses over the years, is that you get an opportunity to serve a major client, or two, and they own like 40 to 50% of your business. You take, at some point in time, you've got somebody who literally owns more of your business than you do. And then what happens is you go out of favor for some reason, and that's it. Your business is in deep trouble. So how do you get how have you learned to get the balance right about, how many clients, what size clients?
Sure. Well, there's a couple different things that I'll try to unpack there. Types of clients are very important in scaling an agency, in my opinion. There's a few different things to think about and look at there. We learned early on that if you're focused only on the US, you better find those brands that are multi-lines of business or own multiple brands. Think Bank of America on a finance side having 8 lines of business, or P&G having countless amounts of brands to scale with. And I think the important thing here, yes, you need more sales, but you need to sell to the right profile customer. And most importantly, and everybody forgets about this because sales is, the sexy side of the business or the fun part, retaining customers and growing customers by building the trust and delivering on the promise. That's where your scale comes, because you'll always continue to sell, ideally, some good, some bad months, whatever the case may be. But if your base is growing, then that's just accretive on top, right? And a lot of folks forget about sadly, in our space, even though it's a services-based industry, deliver on the promise, take care of your customer, follow through. If you promise to do something, own it, like make it happen. And I think that is critically important. But then the next thing to think about from a scale perspective is, do we want to work outside the US? Not a lot of people know this, but at iProspect, we were scaled in countless countries, and our business that I'm running now is scaled in countless countries. The long tail of all of the countries you're doing business in can add up to a whole lot more than just the US. This is not just a US world that we live in, right? Certainly it drives a lot of things for our industry, but 30% of the revenue at iProspect was the US. Everything else was outside. And that was when I left, $700+ million company, right? So huge business. I think
Sorry,
that's
Mike,
another
can I just ask you
consideration.
this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's a really important thing to think about in terms of your own personal development, because you said, limited experience in terms of the number of agencies that you've worked with, but in terms of the skill set that you've developed to be able to grow those agencies, then you don't have to be with a dozen, but a lot of it's transferable. I was there with iProspect at the very beginning. In fact, the first episode that we did in this series was with Rob Murray, who was there. Rob, Frederick Marchini, and I were the and Paul Wilson on the sales side were the senior executives there. And Frederick was a very smart guy as well. He had a vision, but he fully understood himself. There's only so much business I can be doing here in the US, and there is the rest of the world to go for. So yeah, I mean, that went from a really small company to one of the largest. And by getting the balance right, going international. In fact, I told Rob I was very proud once, having been with iProspect at the very beginning, that one day I was in Beijing in China, and I went into the iProspect office in Beijing, and I thought, wow, it's come a long way from above a bank in Boston. If you think about that, was there a lot that you could look at and learn from how iProspect did that to be able to implement in that at NP Digital? Because having worked with you there, I understand that the mission is kind of like the iProspect one, is to grow really well and you are growing rapidly internationally, yeah?
Yeah. I think, look, we saw the opportunity at Kario. We weren't around long enough because we got gobbled up into the iProspect world to fulfill on that strategy, but it was working, right? We landed some gigantic accounts, and I'm getting back to your revenue concentration point or question. So that this is the build here. We had a few $6 million accounts on a $40 million book, and so when clients start representing close to 20% individually of your revenues, to your point, it gets concerning. So my rule of thumb is always, once a client gets to represent 10% of your revenue, and this is for a scaled agency, not a brand new agency, you should start thinking about how you staff, structure, and support that client, because if it goes away overnight, and I've experienced that, it can be difficult to then adjust your cost base and make changes to the business without having to affect, unfortunately, people's lives by reducing headcount, and that's a struggle. It's great when you win these global remits and you've got $10 million plus clients in fees, but it gets a little scary at that point. So it's just about knowing at what point you need to isolate, manage it somewhat out of the normal day-to-day business, and have a plan in place in the event that client does disappear overnight. But on the scale side, internationally, absolutely, that is where I really took that way of thinking and learned a lot was at iProspect, and being on the global steering board at that organization and sitting there with a lot of the people that I work with now, and a lot of my peers that are at other agencies and big ones. I learned a lot about how much you can scale an agency by going into international markets. But I think it's critical to understand and know where and why you're going into a market. At iProspect, it was simply there was access to a lot of very inexpensive capital through Dentsu in Japan and the relationship that they had with iProspect and allowing us to do a lot of M&A globally. At this company here, believe it or not, we use thought leadership and performance marketing to drive our brand and drive our business forward. And we just look at where the interest is coming from around the world. And when we get a certain number of inbound, let's call them people reaching out to us on a monthly basis, usually it's about 500 to 1,000. We say, hey, we probably should to think about responding to some of these people wanting to work with us in said country and organically launch in those countries. Now, I won't even get into how easy it is in certain countries versus others, and then ultimately how do you scale that faster through M&A. But that's been a playbook that I think is, if you really want to have a big agency, you've got to embrace the global component. Otherwise, it's not like there's a ceiling for US only, but it's harder. It's just harder.
It's interesting that I have this opportunity to talk to people like yourself and be able to share some of my own experience with a lot of people who are tuning in. Are people who are with smaller agencies, mid-size, want to know how to scale. When you get to a certain point in your career and you're working with an agency and you go, we get like 500 to 1,000 leads. And it just trips off the tongue there. There are people out there going, man, we wish we could get 20.
Well, keep in mind, leads are, in marketing speak, they're contacts, right? They're people signing up for our webinars or reading our thought leadership pieces. So they're not like warm leads, but we get quite a few. And keep in mind, that's why we structured the business the way that we did, with an SMB division and an enterprise division, because the users of the technology and the marketers that are listening to our webinars and reading our content, most of them, 99% of them, are small businesses. There's way more small businesses than our big brands, right? There's like 34 million or something in the US alone, millions being added every year. So we saw an opportunity there to service both sides of the business. And that's why we have a small business division within our organization.
Yeah, so you're pretty unique in that sense, and we've talked about this before, in the way that you've structured the business. There's nothing quite like it anywhere else in the industry, where you have managed to put the technology over there, the enterprise agency is over here, and then you're dealing with smaller businesses, SMBs, over there. I mean, it's a pretty cool trick to pull off because, as we've said before, there can be confusion in the industry as to, I'll go to NP Digital, I'm a small business and they deal with small businesses. No, you're with the wrong NP Digital. It's this one over here, kind of thing. I would love to talk about that a bit more, but we've covered a lot of ground. This is great. What I would like to literally just for a couple of minutes, and then finish you with the final probing question, is given that I said at the very beginning, that we all started with this online internet and nobody had ever heard of it before. So there's this learning curve. In a similar way, even though we've learned a lot more about digital, the game is changing completely, with people having to get their head around AI and machine learning, what it can, what it can't do, and that kind of thing. I mentioned that so many people are now getting involved in, we've got this new AI kind of tool. If people at the smaller agencies, growing agencies, want to take advantage of this change in the industry, should they be thinking about, well, we better get some of this cool AI technology in, or should and change their focus a little bit, or should they just be doing services?
I don't think in today's environment you can have a successful services business without underlying technology. I just don't. You can't compete from a speed to market perspective. You can't compete from a price point perspective, right? Because a lot of these AI solutions, they're not replacing, and I know everybody reads the same thing, and I don't want to sound like I'm regurgitating here, but preaching to the choir, I'm sure. AI is not replacing our headcount. It's just making us more efficient so that we can focus on things that are important to the customer. The customer doesn't care how you get the work done, honestly. They just want the business outcomes. So if you can leverage the technology to eliminate a lot of the mundane, repeatable tasks, you can have your team focus more on those strategic ideas and the ideation that then allows us to put forward thoughts and suggestions on, even when outside of our remit. Hey, we think that this would be a good idea for a brand campaign for your business, or something around a product offering. We should do this, that, or the other. And then the client starts to think about you as a true partner. And as long as you can own it after thinking outside of your remit and help them see it through to fruition, I think that goes a long way. But I find it interesting that everyone is just bolting AI into their business, right? Because at the end of the day, and there's a few AI only agencies I've seen pop up in the last couple of weeks, but people hire people, right? They hire people they like, they hire people they trust. And maybe that in the future will be, I trust this AI bot or agent to be my agency partner, but I don't think we're there yet. And so as such, They just want you to deliver what you promise, and that's results and business outcomes. How you get there, to them, it doesn't matter. That's your problem, meaning the agency owner's problem. But it is helping quite a bit from an efficiency and a speed to market perspective to get things off the ground for our clients.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned going along the way, and I've been in agency business for a long time, even before I came on back in 1995. What I learned, agency business is a people business. It is about the relationships. I mean, I worked for an agency where they had clients on board for 18 years, 17 years. And these are large enterprise level clients, and it is about the people and getting to understand how the client works and being literally embedding yourself and being part of their business.
It's how I built my career. And we, unfortunately, there's not a lot of differentiation when you get your hands on the different presentations from agency to agency, right? It's a sea of sameness a lot of times because the channels are fairly limited. I know there's way more now than there were 25 years ago, but everybody's working on the same things and executing in the same ways, and everybody's sharing best practices. So if you do enough research and educate yourself enough, I would say if you're working with a reasonably established business, everyone's going to be able to drive results. But that human element, that relationship element, that trust factor, that's why clients stay with you. That's why clients follow you from agency to agency to agency.
And that's why I've always said the retention plan, retaining clients, is right up there at the top. And I think if you do it right, you can get, maybe you're not going to get 100%, but you could get 80%. That's for sure.
Sure.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, Mike. This has been great. And I know for a fact, because I can see some of the comments that are coming through right now, that people are learning a lot, and an hour is just too short. But if you were to give sage wisdom, just 2 or 3 of the most important things that you've learned, even just 2, that if you were like to go back now to reaching that point where I think we're ready to go for growth, what do you focus on? Where do you put your attention first?
Vision for the agency. Getting everybody marching in the same direction is so critical when you start to scale and you get into hundreds or thousands of employees, right? Because if everybody's marching in the same direction and understands what the goal is, you will have a more symbiotic relationship around the world with your employees. So I think that that's critical from a leadership perspective. Know what you want for your future outcome, whether that's a 3-year, 5-year future plan, and sing it all day long, every day to your employees and remind them of what it is, because that is critical. I would say, based upon what you want your outcome of your business to be, understand how you're going to get there. Meaning, do you need partners? Do you need money? Can you do this on your own? Can you bootstrap it? Because I have preferences. And I think that, at some point when you make a decision to bring on a new partner, whether that be a financial institution like a PE or a VC, or you decide, hey, I want to be acquired to help scale this business with a strategic partner like a holding company, you're going to get a lot of outside pressure to manage your business at a profitability target that is probably too high. And unfortunately, when you give up control of your business, you don't have the ability to push back too hard. So know that going into your business, if you really want to become a big business and you want to use partners to get there faster, you may not be able to get there the way you want. And you may not do the service to your customers that you need to satisfy them. And I think that is the last lesson, is that just deliver on your promise. Don't oversell your client, and follow through on what that promise is. And if you somehow have the wherewithal or the means to not take out outside investment too soon, I think that's probably the right strategy, because then you can manage your cost base and you can manage your profitability targets to something that is more reasonable, that allows you to staff right for your customer. But there's a time and place for taking on that external money for when you need it, and you need a partner to help you do things that you just can't afford or do on your own.
And when you do take that money, remember, you have to pay it back.
Yeah, not a lot of people understand the M&A environment and the debt structures post first acquisition and the second turn that's coming your way, and preferences and things to that effect. Yeah.
Mike, this has been great. We've got 1 minute left. I don't know if we've got any time to take any questions, but this has been a fantastic opportunity for people to listen to somebody. And I've known Mike for a long time. We're friends. He is one of the most successful guys. But right now, it's an exciting time for you at NP Digital. You're growing internationally, still one of the fastest growing. So apparently you haven't lost your touch yet.
We'll see. It depends on who you ask, right?
All right, so that just about winds it up. Doesn't look like there are any questions popping through at the moment, but I'm sure if anybody has one, they can get them through to Anton at Duda. He can pass them on to you. But Mike, great to see you, and thank you so much. This has been very helpful for a lot of those small companies who've been tuning in today.
Always a pleasure,
And
Mike.
thank you to everybody else for tuning in. This has been great to have you. If you can't see this one live, you certainly will be able to get it on demand very, very soon. And I will be back with another before the end of this year, and we'll be able to speak to somebody else who's successfully grown a business. Great. Thank you very much for that, and catch you all next time.
Take care, Mike G.